welcome to my first episode of the Discworld, where I will be rereading every single Discworld novel and then making these type of videos where I will be gushing about them and talking about the books, about what happens, what characters we meet, and probably be spoilerific. I am doing this experiment of rereading every single Discworld novel in chronological order, beginning with the very first Discworld novel, The Color of Magic. Now this novel was first published in 1983. This copy is from 1998, and the cover. The first Discworld novels were their covers were striking, with such absolute just details. The art of the first Discworld novels were just... We are here to talk about the book itself, The Color of Magic. Look at him! Ah, he was so young. This is, as I said, the very first Discworld novel published. And again, it was published in 1983. It's probably, definitely, maybe not the best book to start with if you are a beginner to the Discworld. Now, I know that sounds a little bit like snobbish thing to say, but recommendation would be to not start with the very first book, because they aren't bad. I will not go that route. I love this book. It is not bad, but it's not the best as an introduction to the Discworld, because although this book says they're so... the world building, I hadn't realized until I was rereading this to make this video. The world building is in every single word, because the Discworld, it definitely took quite a bit of thinking in order to make it a place, because the Discworld is really unrealistic and at the same time very realistic. What we have here is it is a world, a disc, basically shaped like a pie or pizza, that sits on the back of in a distant and second-hand set of dimensions, in an astral plane that was never meant to fly. The curling star mist waver and part. See. Great Atune the turtle comes, swimming slowly through the interstellar gulf, hydrogen frost on his ponderous limbs, his huge and ancient shell pocked with meteor crates. Through sea-sized eyes that are crusted with ram and asteroid dust, he stares fixedly at the destination. In a brain bigger than a city with geological slowness, he thinks only of the weight. Most of the weight is, of course, accounted for by Brillia, the bull, Great Typhon, and Jerakeen, the four giant elephants upon whose broad and star-tanned shoulders the disk of the world rests, garlanded by the long waterfall at its vast circumference, and domed by the baby blue vault of heaven. I do apologize for my pronunciation. English is not my first language, and sometimes the words are just... The way that this book is structured, it is very different from the main Discworld novels that I, for example, think of when I think of a Discworld. And most of the books, they don't have chapters, they don't really have breaks, they have scene breaks. So it is so easy to just start a book and just keep going. And it's really hard to take a break, because it's just just one small one. This book, however, I had completely forgotten how very different it is from later books, because first off, it has a table of contents, and it is essentially 4 short stories with 2 prologues. So we have the prologue and the Color of Magic itself. We have Color of Magic, the actual first story. Then we have the prologue and the story, the Sending of 8. Then we have the Lure of the Worm. And the last story that is Close to the Edge. Technically speaking, the color of magic is a duology with the light fantastic. It begins with the great ancient city of Ankh-Morpork burning. And the reason is so very present. It's because, essentially, Twoflower, the very first tourist on the Discworld, a very trusting, bit naive, idealistic individual from the Counterweight continent. And the Counterweight continent does have a very different culture. It's more cultured, basically. Ankh-Morpork, it is... how do you explain Ankh-Morpork? Ankh-Morpork is that fantasy city where all the heroes of the disc, all the heroes of high fantasy, the ones that go and slay dragons, find treasures in ancient ruins and temples, save maidens from sacrifices and then some. Ankh-Morpork is a city where every single hero ends up. There's a lot of things that happen in Ankh-Morpork, and we will be visiting her further on. Sweet Twoflower. He's adorable. He's a little bit annoying at times because he's so naive and idealistic, but I do really like him. He introduces the barkeep of the Broken Drum to the concept of insurance. And because of the way that the Ankh-Morpork people work and how their brains work, immediately upon the introduction of insurance, they invent insurance fraud, and the end result is that Ankh-Morpork burns. Our main character, however, is Rincewind, the wizard, who is technically speaking, a failed wizard for many reasons. He's not really good at magic, is what I'm getting at. The reason that I given up here in the very first book is because when he was a student at the wizard school, he took a bet or a dare to go and open a forbidden book left by the creator of the Discworld. That's a spell book that contained the 8 great spells that created the Discworld, and one of those 8 great spells burned itself into his mind, and he cannot retain any other spell. But the wonderful thing about Rincewind is that he is an utter and complete coward, and he's 100% aware of it, and he owns it. He's a coward, that's how he has survived, but he's also really knowledgeable about language and survival. He's met a lot of people, he's met a lot of the heroes of the disc, so he knows. He is tasked by the patrician of Ankh-Morpork to guide and protect Twoflower. Shenanigans ensue. Ankh-Morpork burns, partially because of Twoflower, and they run away. And that essentially sets the tone for the Discworld, the entire novels. There is always going to be that certain level of humor. Next story is the Sending of 8. And that's where they have been on a run. Now, it would be prudent to mention that the reason why all these things are happening is because the gods of the Discworld are very involved with what happens with particularly heroes. They are playing a board game with dice, and their pieces are the people of the Discworld and heroes and all the creatures. So all the shenanigans that happen are because the gods are bored and they are playing a board game. Now, there are 2 main gods who are central to the events of this story, and that would be Fate, the most terrifying god on the Discworld, and then the Lady, the other most terrifying god of the Discworld. Fate is self-explanatory. The Lady, you know who she is, but you can never mention her by name because then she must leave. Sometimes she comes to your aid and sometimes she doesn't. She really likes gamblers, but sometimes she just doesn't show up. Biggest clue is that Her signature color is green, and she really likes the sound of dice. And she's a good player. The Sanding of 8 is essentially at the time of the board game when they enter a forest. So Rincewind actually ends up being taken prisoner by a Hamadryad and her entourage, her clan of dryads, both sea females and then male dryads, which whew. And why? Because Rincewind, upon shenanigans, escaped up into a tree to escape very angry wolves, and he accidentally hurt the tree, and the Hamadryad, not being too fond of it, decides that he needs to die for it. Meanwhile, our sweet precious Twoflower has stumbled his way into the temple of the Soul Eater Bel-Shamaroth. I have no idea how to pronounce that. I'm just gonna gun it. And the thing about Bel-Shamaroth is that its number is 8. 8 on the Discworld is a magic number. It is the number of, for example, colors in a rainbow, because there's an 8th color, which is the color of magic. So everything in this temple, every single stone, everything, the shape of the temple, the shape of the tunnels that are leading into the 8-shaped chamber way down below, has, if you count the floor and the ceiling, has 8. So 8 being a magical number means that, for example, wizards can't say it or don't dare to say it because, well, wizards are like center points of magic, and 8 summons Bel-Shamaroth. So if a wizard says that particular number, they risk summoning the Soul Eater, and obviously with a title like that, you do not want the attention of the Soul Eater. Fortunately, or unfortunately, fortunately. And within this temple, they come across one of the currently greatest heroes on the Discworld, Hran the Barbarian. And he is considered something of an intellectual when it comes to barbarians, because he can count without using his fingers, and he can think without moving his lips. Obviously, since we are roughly in the half part of the book, they escape the Soul Eater with salamanders. Another thing that I definitely forgot to mention at the beginning of this is that Twoflower, adorable Twoflower, he has the luggage. And the luggage, it is essentially a sapient chest. The luggage is made out of sapient pearwood, which is extremely magical wood that is anywhere else than on the continent. Sapient pearwood is rare, extremely rare, and therefore very valuable. On the continent, however, it's apparently very common, so Twoflower doesn't think much of it. And the luggage, it is a chest that travels on hundreds and hundreds of itty bitty legs, and it will follow its owner everywhere. When I say everywhere, I mean everywhere. In the history of the Discworld, there have been emperors whose entire belongings have been placed in boxes and chests made out of pearwood, because those items will follow their masters into the afterlife and beyond. After they escape the Soul Eater, the third story is the Lure of the Worm. And that's when they come across yet another magical area. Basically, what we need to address here is the fact that magic on the Discworld isn't willy-nilly. It is very restricted, particularly around the center, where center is of the Discworld. So long time ago, around the time that the Discworld was completed by its creator, there was a magical war. Essentially meaning that magic got thrown around willy-nilly, gods and the first men were fighting, and it ended with the old high ones that are above everything else, basically stepping down saying, nope. The gods were banished to a higher place, men were remade considerably smaller, and magic was sucked out of the Discworld. But because of the magic war, there are pockets of areas within the Discworld where magic is a lot. Basically, magic is described and basically treated like nuclear waste. Our three wonderful characters, Rincewind, Twoflower, and Ron the Barbarian, they find themselves in a forest yet again. They realize that they are in a high-density magical field and decide to book it. Because, bad news. Worse news, they've been found out. Because they've been found out by the inhabitants of the Wyrmberg, which is, oh, that's a situation. The Wyrmberg is currently having a succession crisis because the last Lord of the Wyrmberg, Liessa the First, he was assassinated by his daughter Liessa Wyrmbidder, what, like 3 months ago? But because he feels that none of his 3 children are strong enough to succeed him, he's decided to hang on until there is a single successor. So he has 3 children. So that would be Liessa Wyrmbidder, because she is the only one who actually is able to call forth the dragons, because she is the only one with a somewhat strong enough imagination. Her brothers are Liartes and Liartes. Until the events of Gorge, this is the only time that we will see dragons, and the dragons here aren't actually real. They are real, but they're not real. Liessa, being a smart, lovely young woman, having just murdered her father, but she keeps visiting him because she's a daddy's girl. I love that part. She decides that because of the way that the patriarchy works in that society, she's gonna be better off if she has a strong husband. And she's very, very specific about what kind of husband she wants. She wants a strong, strapping lad with not much in the brain department. And Ron the Barbarian fits her bill perfectly. So she decides to hire him to kill her brothers. Ron the Barbarian and Twoflower are captured and brought to the Wyrmberg. Rincewind, however, is chased down by a dragon rider in order to, be killed. He is, however, paired up with Ron's magical sword. So the magical sword Kring, that just keeps talking. And it's rather annoying. Kring the magic sword forces Rincewind to basically get to Wyrmberg in order to free Ron and Twoflower. Shenanigans ensue, and it ends with Twoflower being able to materialize a dragon to rescue Rincewind from certain death by falling, and then they go to save Ron, who has defeated the 2 Worm Lords and is about to apparently marry Liessa. So they rescue him. He's not happy about it. She jumps on her dragon and goes after them because that's her man meat. I can only assume that Ron and Liessa do marry. Basically what happens is that they fly too high up, which depletes the oxygen, so Twoflower passes out. They fall, Liessa grabs Ron, and that's the last thing we see of them. Because of how magic is on the Discworld. So here's the basically my favorite part of this book. I love it. Because of parallel universes, and because of Rincewind's desperation, and because of the magic and just all things, Rincewind and Twoflower jump dimensions. The dimension that they jump into is essentially our world, essentially. So Rincewind, the failed wizard, becomes Dr. Rincewind, a 33-year-old bachelor sweet who is raised in New Jersey. He stops a terrorist from hijacking a plane. But the most favorite part about this entire thing is because essentially in our world he would have been a scientist. He would have been a specialist in the breakaway oxidation phenomena of certain nuclear reactors. He would have been a hardcore scientist. But obviously they can't stay in a parallel universe. The reality is going to need, and it has to bounce back because the Luggage follows them and essentially breaks reality. So in order for reality to reassert itself, out they bounce. And they end up falling into the Circle C. So our story picks up close to the edge. Last part of the book, and it's so good. Essentially, this is 6 months after the last event, after they've fallen into the Circle C. And Twoflower and Rincewind are swept by the current towards the edge of the disc. Fortunately, they are caught in the circumference that circles a part of the circumference, that is the rim or the edge of the disc. They are picked up by the sea troll, Tethys. Now, he is the only sea troll on the disc because he is actually from another planet. He is from another disc, another flat world called Bathys. He is literally an alien on the disc world, and to him everything in this new planet is just weird and extremely, basically alien. Tethys, as a sea troll, he is literally made out of water. Not like us humans who are, you know, like this, meat puppets. He is literally made out of sentient water. So to him, everyone else on the Discworld is weird, basically. Now throughout the story, the Luggage is chasing after them. It's trying to catch up with them, and it is facing a lot of instances and basically being a sea monster, let's put it like that. The scenes with the Luggage where it is basically terrorizing everything on its path to its master Twoflower is just... Basically this book, the very beginning, starts with mentioning the astrozoologist of the Kingdom of Krull. The Kingdom of Krull is an ancient kingdom on the very edge of the planet disc. And they are very interested in finding out about Great Atune, what the gender of Great Atune is, because the gender is going to inform what the future is going to be. Like, if Great Atune is male or female and meets another world turtle, what's going to happen? Are they going to mate? Are they going to fight? What will happen? Everything is further exasperated by the fact that the lady and Fate are now the two last remaining gods playing this dice game. Rincewind and Twoflower are two pawns of the lady, and Fate is... he's done with them. He wants them dead. So he makes a deal with the arch astronomer of Krull to pick up Rincewind and Twoflower from where they are and sacrifice them to Fate in order for their expedition into finding out Great Atune's gender will go well. And this part I absolutely... it's another part that I love. It is the fantasy equivalent of spaceflight. The Kingdom of Krull has built a vessel that is shaped like a giant salmon made out of bronze. And the whole description about everything around this, like, just... And they don't call their two will-be heroes, and instead of calling them something like astronauts, they call them Chelonauts. I love it. Everything about this story, every single word used, is based on the fact that this planet, I keep calling it a planet, I'm stuck on that word. This world is a flat world, is a disc resting on the back of four ginormous elephants that are in turn standing on the shell of a giant world turtle. Everything informs on the language used in this book, and I just... there's a reason why Terry Pratchett just inspired my love of an entirely foreign language. Like, as I mentioned before, this story ends on a cliffhanger. It ends with Tethys, Twoflower, and it's basically all three of them, Tethys, Twoflower, and Rincewind, along with the Luggage, because it goes after its master, they fall off the edge of the world. And, you know, as I said, this is the only instance of an actual duology within the Discworld canon. This is the only book that ends literally on the cliffhanger. That is where we're gonna have to wrap this up, because the story continues in the Light Fantastic. So yeah, as I said, this is the very first Discworld novel, and obviously the format is going to change. Sir Terry Pratchett was writing these books for decades, and the characters introduced do change and evolve. Now Rincewind, he always remains that lovable, dearly beloved coward. He knows he's a coward. He owns that he's a coward. That doesn't change, but he does evolve as a character, as well as Death. Death in this is much more callous, much more... He is less of the character that he will become. That was a really weird way of putting it. Death is... I'm pretty certain he's one of the most favorite characters of the Discworld canon, because Death, he evolves so much. Death is just... he is a fantastic character. Further along the line, like, he's not a bad character in this book. He is a pivotal character, but he does things that his later incarnation would not agree with. Like, as I said, he's more callous in this book, and that's just not who Death becomes. Death becomes him. That is where we're gonna leave this review. And we will pick up next time when I have read The Light Fantastic, and we'll do another overview, synopsis, gushing video about it. So until next time, the turtle moves.